James 1:20 says, "For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God." It suggests that there is a difference between wrath as expressed by God and that by man. Denise Grant, a contributor to this site, has produced a very good series of short videos on the subject of the wrath of God. To help bring attention to her and her husband Ozzy's work with their website, God on Trial, and their YouTube channel, I'm featuring the first video in their Wrath of God series here. It's only 5 minutes, so please watch it all and give it a like or share.
One of the most misunderstood and misrepresented topics in the Bible is the wrath of God. God punishing sinners in wrath is a recurring theme that runs throughout the Bible. The wrath of God is real, but we need to understand what it really means. It has puzzled the human race for millennia, and not surprisingly, for how can one harmonize the wrath of God with the love of God? Isn't this a most puzzling paradox? And yet, this is a highly important subject, one which every human being ought to know and understand properly. Before we can understand the wrath of God, however, we must first realize a few very important things. For instance, the phrase "the wrath of God" is a biblical term. Terms are not to be interpreted literally. Therefore, the wrath of God is not exactly what it appears to be. Thus, the wrath of God should not be understood to mean that God gets angry with sinners and then decides to destroy them. When studying the wrath of God, we must first and foremost allow the Bible itself to define what it is. We must also study the entire Bible to see how this term has been used in the past and what happened when it was used in the past. We must also find out what causes it, what factors activate it. There's a very interesting verse in the book of James that addresses the concept of wrath. "So then, my beloved brethren, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God." The words of James are foundational, and as we study the wrath of God, we must always keep them in mind. We must always remember that the wrath of man does not produce the righteousness of God. This statement is extremely important because from the start of our study on the wrath of God, it informs us that there are two kinds of wrath: human wrath, the wrath of man, and godly wrath, the wrath of God. What James is communicating to us is that man's wrath, which comes from the flesh, from the moral system of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, is not in harmony with God's righteousness, which is from the tree of life. Therefore, man's wrath does not produce the righteousness of God. Hence, the wrath of man cannot be the same thing as the wrath of God, and vice versa. Consequently, the wrath of God must produce the righteousness of God. Jacob's sons, Simeon and Levi, provide an excellent example of the wrath of man, which does not produce the righteousness of God. We learn about them from Jacob's blessings to each one of his sons. When the patriarch arrives at Simeon and Levi, the two brothers who had avenged their sister's honor by killing not only those who had personally dishonored her, but all the males in their city, he says, "Simeon and Levi are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel." Jacob knew that Simeon and Levi were brothers. After all, they were his sons. What he meant by saying that they were brothers is that they were alike, similar, cut from the same cloth, so to speak. Instruments of cruelty and violence were in their dwelling place. Jacob understood that Simeon and Levi's violent wrath was cruel, and as such it was not in harmony with God. For that reason he said, "Let not my soul enter their counsel." The wrath of God, then, has to be a term that means something altogether different from the wrath of man, from what man considers wrath. God's wrath cannot be cruel or violent, or it would be like man's wrath.
Doesn't that very nicely make the distinction given in James 1:20? For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. Some other versions, for human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. If you are angry, you cannot do any of the good things God wants done. Why not? Because man's wrath is very different than the wrath of God. See further videos in this series at the God on Trial website. If God's wrath is different, we need to carefully look at verses that sound like God is really, really mad and consider that perhaps something else must be going on. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel here and watch this very good video. It's only 2 minutes long, showing that something else must be going on.